For sure.
Thank you, Amy, for remembering to record. It's a team. We're a team here tonight, man.
Definitely.
All right. And Amy, you got the slide deck.
Yes.
All right. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I mean, the waiting room. So what are your burning questions? Place them in the chat. I was just kind of waiting. See if there's
We
any.
got big believers in wait time here. So please make sure you think about your burning questions. Maybe it's, how do I get started as a teacher? What does my district need to do?
And again, right, I was in that district that was living in a place of balanced literacy, and I knew there was a science, and we had to kind of get our brains wrapped around that. So, you know, there was a process and a journey in our district in Sturgeon Bay. So feel free to ask. Okay. All right. So then, you know, Sarah will keep an eye on those questions. We'll address them here at the end. The first thing we really want to talk about is, what is the science of reading? So what we have in front of us here is the defining guide that was released from the Reading League National. So it's a free document. So you can log into and pop it in the chat, the Reading League. And if you're not a member already, become a member. The national organization has a great website. And those of you here, you know, hopefully you're a member of Wisconsin. And if you're not here, hopefully you're a member of your chapter, because there are chapters throughout the country. So about a year ago, right, this defining guide was put together by the national organization because, you know, there was just a lot of misunderstanding, because, you know, this term, the science of reading, as Amy said, it really didn't exist when she started. So it's kind of become this term, almost like a buzzword, right? Matter of fact, I was just getting some copies from the printer today, and the gal giving me my copies says, "Oh, science of reading. My colleague just bought a curriculum that's the science of reading curriculum." And I'm like, okay. And so that term is getting used quite a bit. So we just really want to clarify what it is and what it isn't. Okay. And then feel free to pop in, friends. Okay. So in the defining guide, it states the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and the issues related to reading and writing. So this research has been derived from research in multiple fields over 5 decades. In 1967, Jeanne Schopf wrote the first research article about how a brain learns to read, right? 1967, year I was born. And then, of course, and over time, then when in 1986, right, Goff and Tumner came up with this framework called the simple view of reading, and basically kind of explain what has to happen for the reading brain. That was 1986, and I was in year 2 of my undergrad at that time. Never heard of it, right? And then the year 2000, the National Reading Panel report came out. And then shortly after that, that's when a lot of the Reading First initiative started happening. So those of you, it's like, really, it's 2020, it's 2023, and 23 years ago, the National Reading Panel report came out, and we're like, just kind of waking up to what this thing is called the science of reading. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? So that's what it is. What is it not? Okay, so just get it really clear, everyone. It is not an ideology or philosophy. It is not a fad, trend, new idea, or a pendulum swing. It's been here all the time. It can't be swinging. It's always been here, right? It's been here for over 40 years. It's just we're kind of waking up to what the research is telling us about how the reading brain learns to read. It's not a political agenda, and that's what was the big pushback with the Reading First initiative, like it was a political agenda. It's certainly not a one size fits all. It's not a program of instruction, right? So my friend at the copy store, right, when she said, "I got a curriculum that's the science of reading," it's not a program of instruction, so be wary of that. It's not a single typo component of instruction, such as phonics, right? It's not just phonics, right? The science of reading encompasses all areas of the reading brain. So make sure that we understand that but phonics are important, but it's not just phonics, okay? Keep those questions going. So we're gonna have a little game here, true or false, and you can put it in the chat, okay? So let's kind of just break down some of those beliefs that we might possibly have, right? So question number 1, research supports 3 cueing, true or false? We have some really smart people on this call. Pretty impressive. Keep dropping in. Next question. Teaching in preferred learning styles improves student learning. Can't pull the wool over these guys' eyes, I think.
I was just teaching some teachers earlier this week, and I said learning styles are not real. And one of the teachers who'd been teaching for, I don't know, 25, 20 years, her mouth dropped open. And it's not that we don't have preferences, right? But there just are not, when they test the actual, if you say that I'm an auditory learner and I teach you in your preferred mode, and then I test you in that preferred mode, the results are no different than if you were learning in another way. So it's important to kind of break the myth. We can still have our preferences, but there's no such thing as a preferred, as a learning style that's going to improve your learning.
And sad thing is, like, Dan Willingham has written a lot about preferred learning styles, right? And it's still being taught in undergrad programs, right? And so really it is actually perpetuates in majority of population seem to believe it as well. But I believe there were, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 20 studies done on learning styles, and maybe only 3 of the 20 actually had any kind of relationship. But really what they found in the studies is, as Amy said, it was just really preferences. And the whole idea of this confirmation bias, when we see kids be successful in a certain area, we seem to think because they are successful that they must have a preferred learning style. So stop those lesson plans. You don't need to do all those lesson plans around learning styles. Amy, did you want to speak to number 1? Because I was just going to go through it and let you kind of just speak to it.
Oh, well, I think the group was right. There's no research to support 3 cueing, but there certainly is research to support the need that, we create. Let me back up the truck here. There's research that shows that if we are teaching students with the 3 cueing method, that you're actually creating compensators, right? That's why in Wisconsin, we just passed Act 20, and that is really, it's banning the 3 cues from instruction at the K-3 level, because we know that when you play what Lynn Stone likes to call look away bingo, and you get kids' eyes off the word, you're actually delaying the growth of the pathways in the brain that are necessary for reading. So while we can use other ways of approaching, looking at the picture, using context to help us access meaning, that does not help us access the decoding of the word. The word is what, the word holds the clues. So, and that's been proven time and again in much of the research.
Excellent. All right, I'll try number 3, and then Amy, you can shed light on that. Learning differences can be explained through understanding that some are left or right-brained.
Brenda's coming in hot with right away. That's awesome.
Jeannie, this is one that I'm not as strong on, so I think you should talk about this one.
Well, it basically, there's no research to support it, right? We know that the reading brain, we know that reading happens in the left hemisphere, right? And so therefore, a lot of the function of learning to read happens in the left hemisphere, but we also have to use that right hemisphere. So there have been some research studies actually with the fMRI screens where, dye has been injected into the brain while children are reading, and both hemispheres are lighting up. So this whole myth of I am left brain, I'm analytical, and I'm right brain, I'm creative, has just been this myth that is just perpetuated in education. And there's really no research to support left brain, right brain. No.
Jennifer, that's a really good question about the letters bill, or the new bill. I think the answer remains to be seen, how that's going to be funded and who's going to be doing it. So.
And we'll speak to that at the end too, because so here we are, but hang on to that question. We will address it. Okay. So seeing letters and words backwards as an indicator of dyslexia.
Correct. That is false. That's a myth. Seeing letters backwards. That's part of the brain as we're taking in print. That part of the brain that was used, the occipital lobe, was used for mirroring faces originally. Everything got mirrored and turned around and upside down and backwards, if you will. So we have to stabilize that and teach the brain to stop flipping so that we see the letter B as a B and the letter D as a D, and not like a chair that you can rotate multiple directions and it's always a chair. A ball and a stick, depending on which way the ball is facing and the stick is pointing, will be a different letter. And so that can take 2 to 3 years for the brain to finally build those pathways in order to stop mirroring or seeing letters backwards. So it is not at all a sign of dyslexia. It's all children go through that process of seeing letters or writing things backwards. Just some of them stick around and do it longer than others.
Yeah, it just takes longer for that brain to repurpose itself and for the shapes to go into the right hemisphere of the brain, really. So if you see kids that are struggling with that, it really comes down to just explicit systematic handwriting instruction. And that's really what will alleviate that reversals, is just a lot of handwriting instruction. 5, the basic theory of how reading works and why some students struggle is backed by a research consensus.
Brenda, you're quick on the trigger. That is true.
I told you she could be running this show tonight.
Yeah.
And we kind of alluded to that already, right? That there's 50 years of research that really supports, some of it's basically settled science on how a child learns to read.
Exactly.
It's been replicated.
Why you're out here and excited, right?
Right.
Yep.
So those of you who are like, okay, our district's going into the science of reading, and what is this thing called the science of reading? And so, the first step is developing your knowledge, right? So where are you at with your level of knowledge of the science, of what the science is telling us on how children learn to read? So a little interactive activity. So we're going to have you kind of think about, you can put it in the chat if you want to, you can just quietly rate yourself, you can just hold up and put the numbers, but we're going to throw some terms out here. And so I want you to rate yourself to kind of just find that level of where you're at. So 4 is, I have a rich understanding, I know this term really well, I can even teach it to others. A 3 would be, I have a vague notion of the word meaning in a particular context. 2 is, I have awareness of its existence, but I have no idea what it means. And then 1 is, I have no knowledge of the word or its existence. So you're ready? Go ahead. How would you rate yourself?
And it might help because it's a little dark. Allophonic variation.
Yeah, I wasn't going to read it, but you go ahead, you read it. Put in the chat, what would you give yourself? A 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1? And it's okay to be a 1. We got to be vulnerable here. It's okay to recognize, I really don't know. And that's okay. Because everybody starts from somewhere. And I know I started off with a hard one, right?
You did, yeah. And honestly, that term, you want to keep coming back to it, even as you start to learn about it. You want to
Right,
keep
'cause,
coming back
yeah.
to what it means, because it's,
Uh-huh.
we'll keep
All right,
going though.
ready?
We're not going to give the answers yet.
Nope.
Co-articulation.
Articulation. Yep. Go ahead, Sarah.
No problem. Teamwork, we said.
Teamwork, we're a team. How would you rate yourself? That 4, a 3, a 2, or 1?
Okay. How about the next one?
And it's okay.
Cohesive devices. Seeing 4s on this one, that's great.
Yeah.
Curriculum-based measurements.
4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. Good.
Derivational suffixes.
Derivational suffixes. Okay, next one.
Consonant cluster.
Now, there's certainly a range of terms here, right? And we did that purposely, right? Because, the reality is when you're learning something new, there's just this big learning curve, right? So go ahead. Oh, give one more.
There's 3 more.
3 more.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Morphophonemic is the next one. So, and the other thing, as you're thinking about morphophonemic, there's a lot of talk, of course, about academic language. This is academic language for the science of reading. And it's academic language that teachers who really have a deep understanding of the language and how to teach it, these are things you want to master. It's not going to be mastered overnight. There are pieces that you'll learn and think, okay, that's what that is. Be patient.
And that's what I think the joy of
Go
the
ahead.
science of reading is the constant learning, is because research is new. People are testing, people are sharing. And I think in the world of education, we've always been collaborators, but we might not have always been clear in our sharing our understandings and and educators tend to always be lifelong learners. And that's the joy of learning and growing in this idea of the science of reading.
Last one, right?
Affricates and then lexicon.
How would you rate yourself? A 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1?
Yep, that was the last one.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, I kind of jumped the gun, but we picked these terms because we wanted to show the range of levels of knowledge that one acquires over time to really understand how to take that research and put it into practice, and what we see with our students. So as you jump in and launch into, I think there's if you hit the clicker again, there's going to be an image comes up. All right. So when you launch into this whole idea of learning about the science of reading, there's these stages of learning, right? And some of you might just have had a little bit of discomfort with some of that terminology, and it's really okay. Because for a lot of us, right, who were raised, who went to school, and we were just taught with balanced literacy approaches, right? In our reality, like, we had kids in front of us that weren't reading, and we just didn't know why or what to do about them. And really, that's, for me, that was that stage of unconscious incompetence. Like, I didn't know that I didn't know that I didn't know. I was just teaching what I was taught, and my training taught me to do. Readers, Writers Workshop, right? Just surround your kids with books and read them books, and they're going to learn to read. So when kids started struggling, I didn't know that I didn't know. And then, of course, in my journey, right, where my daughter started struggling and reading first came in, I started kind of realizing that, I guess there's some things that I don't know, but I'm just going to fake it until I make it. That conscious incompetence. And I'm just going to pretend that I kind of know. And that might happen for a while, like, I'm not really sure, right? And then over time, as you learn a little bit more, you start to like get to the stage of learning where it's this conscious competence. That should be conscious competence there. So if you want to fix that, I don't
Which
know.
one?
Again. So conscious incompetence, it should be conscious competence on the bottom.
Oh, yeah,
left.
I see it.
No, that's conscious incompetence. Yeah.
Mhm.
There you go. It's fine. We'll share again.
Oops,
Okay.
sorry.
So that's to the point where you're like, realize, okay, I'm starting to learn how to teach a child to read, but it's taking me a lot of effort. And then it really isn't until you get to that unconscious competence where you can do without effort, right? You can teach a child, and all those terms that we gave you beforehand, you're like, okay, I know what these terms mean, and I can see a student struggling, and I kind of know how to help them. So one thing that I have learned over this course of 10 years, and Amy's been in this longer than I have been, as far as the science, is teaching reading is rocket science. I mean, and the next slide really kind of brings it home, right? It's like this space of, wow, it's kind of this space of, it's what I learn after you know what all that counts, right? Like you get to a point where you think, oh, I've taken a letters class, or I've taken letters, I've taken this, and you're like, but no, there's still so, as Sarah alluded to, there's so much to learn, right? As far as how to teach a kid to read. And so information does not always translate to transformation, right? So how will you transform your instruction to research-backed, evidence-based literacy practices? So go ahead.
I'm going to back up one slide and share too that the place where people quit is in that conscious incompetence stage where you're like, ugh, I should know more. Like, I don't feel like I'm very good at this right now. And that's true of all learning. And so we have to be aware of the cycle of learning and the patience that it takes to acquire new skills. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, and just to piggyback off that, a lot of what's happening and what we're sharing with you are those pieces that are going to start the journey for you in this. So you have access to these free pieces of literature that if you are really coming with, I don't know what to do, please copy, please download these links and go back to them or share them or continue on with them as we go. But I do think everybody's made the solid point. What comes first? Is it the training or is it the curriculum? And a lot of times, especially now in Wisconsin, as situations have changed, what really does come first? And our belief is that sometimes what comes first is teacher knowledge. And so what we're here to do is to provide you some of those teacher knowledge, which means that choosing the right curriculum is better because we're using what we know as educators and putting that in there. That really kind of sums up this slide, I think, in some ways, is identifying what you need to come first. What is your conscious competence and how do you move to that level in order to make informed decisions? And the Reading League's here to help you. We have curricular guides, we have suggestions, and we offer training too. So don't forget about that. I know Jeannie's got something to add. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we can have a curriculum, right, that we know has been aligned and we're using it, but we don't know the why behind it. We don't know why we're using the particular routines and why we're using the rehearsal. So that's where the teacher knowledge comes in, right? But we can have the teacher knowledge, but then we don't always have the curriculum that's going to support our knowledge. So there's that whole kind of like chicken and the egg, right, Amy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the question. It's really not about one or the other. You do need both. So the research suggests that if you purchase curriculum and then do training around that curriculum, that is definitely a good deal. However, you don't want to get the wrong thing, right? So there is no such thing as the Holy Grail curriculum. I think that might be the next slide. There's really isn't. There's no single core reading program that's going to do everything perfectly. There will always be something additional that you need to add to or change about a core resource. Certainly some are better than others, but even the ones that are being kind of talked about a lot right now, the big knowledge building curriculums like EL and CKLA and all of those, I mean, yes, they align with the science, but there's also aspects of them that you'll need to make adjustments. And on the other hand, there might be resources that receive all green on ed reports that look like the shiny penny. But when you peel back the layers, they are not what they seem. And just keep in mind for ed reports that ed reports is built on the back of the Common Core State Standards, right? Looking at the resources in light of the Common Core State Standards. Now they have moved their cheese a bit. They've been trying hard to address the science of reading as well. But if you're only vetting a curriculum through the lens of the Common Core State Standards, and you're using those foundational skills as the litmus test on whether or not something works or doesn't, or is aligned or not, that never will be enough, because the Common Core State Standards foundational strand cannot possibly be robust enough to address all the different things that we need it to in order for that early learning of reading to be done well. So you could have a green curriculum on ed reports, but when you look at the foundational strand, there could be elements that need supplementing and support. Okay.
We're getting a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah, before you can go ahead and share them. I was just going to say, in the chat, we've loaded some really solid articles. You want to grab those and they'll help you in your journey. So go ahead, Sarah.
So Nicole asked a question as we're moving into that conversation, is how are you streamlining instruction and intervention between gen ed teachers and specialists, including special education, so students are not given a curriculum with a scope and sequence, then leaving for intervention or other support, and it's not meshing? I think that's such a great question. And I think that might be something we want to come back to towards the end, because I think that there's a lot of options for that. And I want a little more clarity to help you that. Your point around, you also shared the diagnosing and determine what looks for and streamlining learning between special ed. And I can give you little examples, and I imagine Jeannie and Amy can too. So that's a great question that I'd like us to come back to.
Yes.
The second question is, how are districts going to move from current instruction, like balanced instruction, readers and writers workshop, to effective SOAR-based instruction in the classroom? And how fast can this change take place? Very great question. And I think we all have some ideas and answers to that. I know one of the big books that people have really attached to or connected with in an elementary is the Shifting the Balance, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a really nice way to take that transition. And for some schools, it happens with curriculum realignments. For us, it was a curriculum realignment that shifted that. I know a neighboring district to New Berlin started with a book study and then moved into making conscious choices and then working on training. So I think there's more to answer to that question as well as we continue with what we're sharing next.
But before you write down Shifting the Balance to do a book study on, you need to watch the Stephanie Stoller 10-minute video that I'll hunt for when somebody else is talking, because the last couple of chapters of Shifting the Balance can reinforce practices from balanced literacy that are not aligned. The first four are very strong, and they are certainly in alignment with what the research says about effective reading instruction. But they kind of veer away on the last two. So you just need to be cautious depending on your teachers, right? If you have a staff that's really not in a headspace where they're ready to make this shift, and they feel like it's being done to them, that it could be helpful to read the book to see the other side. And the other side is also true where if you're further along your journey, then there are other books that you might want to consider reading, like the Christopher Such book, right?
Yeah, and I just want a quick add on, because we're going to move on, to address Janet's second part. How fast can this change take place? And in my humble opinion, it depends on your leadership. It's 100% leadership. If you have strong leadership in your building, and they're leading literacy every single day, and they're wrapping their loving arms around their data, and that's how it can happen a little faster, right? If you don't have strong leadership in your building, leading literacy, and you're doing it by yourself in your classroom and bringing people along with you, kind of like how I did it, it takes a little longer. Mm-hmm. So
That's absolutely true.
Totally
Yeah.
agree.
yeah, so
But I think sometimes leading leadership also requires you to do some own learning. So on that next slide, what we have listed is a collection of programs in order to build your knowledge. And that's a lot of what we're suggesting to start with. Like we've shared some resources, and there are various certifications that help do this. So the Siri certification, Jeanne went through that, and that's been incredibly helpful. The Motion 50, if you click on that, that takes you to the Center for Effective Reading Instruction. And I think there's some like connections through Reading Rockets where you can do some trainings through there. They have, it costs about $350 just for the assessment. And it's really nice.
well, and I just want to add on, like on that series site, and it's kind of with our Act 20, right? That there's a list of accredited programs on there that school districts can, it's a palette. So it's not just letters, there's a palette of approved programs on the series site, from Reading Teachers Top 10 Tools to AIM Pathways to Keys for Literacy. There's a few more that are being added slowly. And so it's just really developing your knowledge. And unfortunately, right, we should have learned this in our undergrad, but we didn't.
And I think it's important too, as you brought up letters, like that's a common one that we're hearing both in the state of Wisconsin, but there's a lot of different options, and it really comes back to comfort. And what did you know? What's your prior knowledge? Like my training I did through the Children's Dyslexia Center of Milwaukee, and was trained in a specific program, and then continued to grow for myself in various other areas, reading books, etc. The Motion 57 grant funding has allowed that, which I think a lot of the menu of learning that Jeanne discussed is available. There are IDA, so International
Dyslexia
Association. Those are accredited situations that you can connect with and do some singular classes. You can right here, independent teacher training programs. And I believe those do also connect to like an Orton Gillingham approach.
Well, and that's the list that I was kind of referring to.
Yes.
You'll have, again, other ones that are like letters is on there, Reading Teachers Top 10 Tools. So there's a variety, AIM Pathways. And so really, you know, it's building your knowledge. And that's how I did it, right? Nobody was training me. I knew I had to learn more, and I just started taking classes. And I just started developing my knowledge.
And I think for some, it's also what capacities can you give? I hear letters is, you know, a big intensive process. Maybe that's not a capacity that you're at this moment, but having and building on other knowledges, other knowledge pieces is. Our CSAs have a variety of connections with cohorts. Amy, you want to talk a little bit about CSAs?
Sure. Well, because of Act 20 and Motion 57, the CSAs have all embraced to varying degrees trainings that are aligned with Siri certification offerings to support our Wisconsin educators. So there will be more grant funding coming out this fall through 8A, which could help pay for any of those ones that are listed under Siri. And actually the IDA accredited and the Siri are basically, they're very similar. You'll see a lot of crossover between the two. Going on. So for example, our CSA has a letters cohort going on, and there's several. CSA 6, I think, has letters. CSA 2 is starting letters there. So all over, you need to kind of pay attention to what's happening at your local CSA to determine if that's a fit for you. We also have our reading teacher program here at CSA 9 that's fully aligned to the science of reading. So if you're a Wisconsin educator, you're certainly able to join us for that. And check out our website. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. And there are, of course, Leadership and Literacy Institute. That's through Wisconsin, and that's part of Act 20 as well. Exactly what that's going to look like in Act 20 is a bit of a question mark still for me, but that's how you get your leaders on board. Those are opportunities for your leaders to bring a team together, principals, superintendents, curriculum coordinators, special ed directors. Those are the folks you need in the room to do the learning on what the science of reading is and how you bring it to life in your district and all the different components, and then set up a 3 to 5 year plan, because it's not going to happen overnight. What's the training teachers are getting? When are we going to vet resources? And to the question about special education and Title I and Gen Ed and how you get those scope and sequences to align, that's a very, very good question. And there's different ways of answering it for sure. I've seen it work where there's been like a one-to-one relationship. And I've also seen it work with the scope and sequence where you've had children who are getting core instruction in one scope and sequence, and then they leave for intervention and it's slightly different, but not so far away from the tier 1 that there can still be connections made. So there's ways of nuancing that can work for a wide range of children. So don't feel like it has to be all or nothing exactly the same, because it's not very likely that you're going to be able to make that work. Tier 1 is not tier 2 and tier 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And then in the chat, I just want to note that Jennifer noted, right, you can't take letters as an individual anymore, that you have to take it through a cohort, usually your district or your.
That's not true. You can take letters as an individual. That's
They changed
actually
it.
not true. Yep, you can. You just, what you do if you're taking it as an individual is you sign on to a public cohort, and I don't know if they have an independent pathway anymore, but you can sign up for it as an individual, and then you would be given options for when those 4 days would occur live.
Thank you for clarifying.
And I
Yeah,
think too, as we continue to look at how to build your knowledge, it is leadership. So I have been lucky enough to where our district kind of started with the Natalie Wexler knowledge gap and was like, whoa, that changed us. And then a lot of deep dives happen. And our admin just took an AIM Pathways leadership, like literacy leadership, which was huge, and has set a whole path for literacy in our own district. And then it's building into secondary teachers now. And so I think when you connect that with almost some other big name instructional practices, that this can have a huge change, but it also requires, back to, I believe it was Nicole's question around how does those connecting between streamlining instruction and intervention, having the knowledge backing you helps have that conversation to streamline. So what you bring to a discussion or a solution is going to make a lot of difference than just say, then I think what I've seen teachers do is bring the complaint, not the solution. So a small little nugget to think about of how you build your knowledge. For us, it was started with a book study, and the Reading League, we offer book studies, but we also have suggested some really great ones around, that
Next slide,
connect
right?
to all of these.
for sure. Yep. Thank you.
So what you see here is just this idea of that learning and adjusting together. So we have a collection of book studies, books to read to help build your knowledge. Big fan of the Reading Brain, as well as that teaching reading source book. I think Jeannie would have some other favorites on that as well.
Well, I mean, if you don't have the core reading source book, you're missing something, because that has everything in it that you would possibly need to know about how to teach a kid to read and activities. So it's pretty robust. But I think we have more on that, don't we?
Yeah. It's another click, Amy. Thanks for managing. Big fan of Anita Archer and her ideas of explicit instruction. I think that's huge, K-12. And then there was a couple more.
Well, and the big deal is, right, the difference between balanced literacy and it's it's structured literacy, right? And so what is structured literacy? It is explicit instruction. And so getting your hands around what is explicit instruction, what does it look like? How can I incorporate our classroom? That's why that is an excellent text. And of course, Anita, everybody's got to know Anita in their educational life.
And if you haven't, then your undergrad is missing out.
Yeah. Explicitinstruction.org is Anita's website. So you can actually see her modeling various components of what is essentially structured literacy in action with the classrooms of kids. Highly recommend checking that out. There's been some good questions in the chat, so I got distracted
Yeah.
by reading the chat.
Yeah.
And I think I like what Rebecca said about the core assessment companion text that goes along with the teaching reading source book. Like, I think there's like a 3-pack that everyone should get, and I highly encourage that. The reading comprehension book blueprint, I love for the upper grades as well as into the secondary world, which is where I live. But you can't go wrong with speech to print and Ms. Moats either.
And I just
Letters
want to
of-
say, if you're really working with people and you have to convince them about what is the science of reading, it's all about the reading brain, right? It's how the brain learns to read. And you dive in a little Stanislas Dehaene and do a little Googling and watch some of his videos. It's like clear as day. Like, this is how we have to teach kids to read. And it has to be this way because majority of them don't have the neural pathways that are necessary to actually learn to read. We have to build them.
Jeannie, did you mean letters doesn't take 4 years? So
I meant 2 years. I'm sorry, I got distracted again like you did. I'll fix it. You keep going.
Yeah. So
I think the question about what's the difference between the Carroll University program, the dyslexia micro credential.
Well, I wanted to explain because Carroll University, they take mind play, and it's a great course. And I know Nate just reviewed it. You know, he does his review of courses. So it's 40 hours, and it goes through all the elements of basically phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency and all. And so what I was trying to explain to Wendy, right, that's a great course. But it's just letters is deeper. It's thicker. So it takes what you learn and just you go way deep. So mind play is a great first start, but if you really want to go dive under, that's where letters will take you. Thanks. Yeah.
yeah, and it's 2 years because volume 1 is the word recognition strand of the reading rope, and volume 2 is the language comprehension strand. So the recommended path is you would have 4 full days of instruction for letters in each of those volumes. And then there's an online path that you also have to complete when you're taking letters. So with some bridge to practice classroom activities. So it's good to spread it out through the year because then you get that spaced practice, which is different than taking a course through college as well.
And I just want to segue and Chris Such's book, The Art and Science of Teaching Primary Reading. It says primary reading because he's from Great Britain. He's from England. And so that's primary school, right? So don't think of it as just primary. I use that text in middle school with my middle school teachers. So it's a great way to, here's the research and here's what it looks like in the classroom. So it's pretty palatable as far as a read, I think. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
On the bottom, just to reiterate, teachers teach children, not programs. So they're going back to, what do I do first? Is it knowledge? Is it programs? Is it programs? Is it knowledge? Well, you can have a program, but you have to have the knowledge that really understand what the program is doing. It's the teachers. It's the teacher knowledge that matters the most. Okay, so what about that Right to Read Act? Those of you who are from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't know how many we have on from Wisconsin. I'm just going to cautiously say that this bill is dense. There's a lot in it. And the timeline for unpacking each of those components needs to be very thoughtful and intentional because not everything is going to happen all at once. So there's parts of the bill related to creating a panel of experts that are going to be distilling down information to the districts. From assessment to curriculum to supports in the buildings to literacy coaches. And then there's also things that the buildings need to do in terms of communication with parents and when they're doing their universal screenings and the timing of those universal screenings and what happens after you screen a student and they score below the 25th percentile. What are all of the things that need to be in place and how do you communicate it? It's very nuanced. So, and that's not even touching on purchasing curricula that doesn't have the 3 Qs and training college professors with letters or something from the series certified. So there are lots of fingers in this bill. And what I'll say is that you want to really connect with your local CISA and pay attention to the DPI blasts that are going to be coming out. They're creating a separate communication stream for specific to the bill. Because we know that it's a lot, and there's a lot to consider in order to bring it to life in the districts. So
I just want to say,
be
you
patient.
can get it and print it off and read it. It's accessible. So
Yep.
it's available, and it's really, it's readable. And it's pretty clear. So if you really want to, you could print that off and take a look at it.
Yeah, it's very good. Good shifts
Okay.
for us. Okay.
So there's a couple more questions that popped in the chat. And I think if we kind of finish our slide, we can address those, and you can.
Yeah, how about we do
if
that?
anyone
Yeah.
have- Yeah. So as we kind of summarize, what am I supposed to do in this whole little time? Where should the change start, and what is required from this change? And we just shared that, in Wisconsin alone, there is a reading bill. But if you're in a different state, maybe be aware of what are those reading laws that you should be considerate of as it relates to both regular education and special education. And if you don't have any, lucky you, I just have a feeling that's not a thing, but in case. But here in the state of Wisconsin, we have some examples. And I'm sorry, I don't have them linked. I linked them to the slides. But these are 4 different schools that have made those positive shifts to being more of a science of reading based school. Thorpe is one that's been high known, and the superintendent was able to speak at our conference. Sturgeon Bay, Jeannie's home location. So obviously she'll be a wonderful response for that. Cudahy, that comes from an article. So Milwaukee metro area, if you will, and they had a shift to the science of reading. I think they used some of Schools Cubed, a partnership with them, and then of course my home district, which is New Berlin, where we have also kind of effectively started that.
And I just want to add on, like Thorpe, I think they're going into year 6. So they're the ones that probably were the trailblazers in Wisconsin, I believe. Sturgeon Bay, we're going into year 3. And their shift, I think Cudahy did this year, so they're going into year 2. And then Sarah, what about you?
We're about that year 2-3 scenario as well.
Yeah. So, and in our district, I tell you what, we started first is our leaders started getting educated, our coaches went first, and they took as many courses as we could. We did book studies. So they were equipped to lead the teachers. So if you are blessed to have coaches in your building, right, you want to get them going, because they're the ones that are going to be leading the shift, working with teachers.
And I'd add that with these 4 Wisconsin-based schools, it is totally worth any district to reach out to them, because they've all had a different way of doing it. Maybe it's a different curriculum, maybe it was a different approach, but no approach was bad if it results in student success. So really that's something, however that change and wherever that change started, respecting that, owning that, and then having those conversations and seeing how does that fit, because Thorpe might work really well for an up north school that has a smaller idea, and maybe Cudahy is better for a slightly more of an urban
setting versus
area,
a rural setting.
Rules, exactly. So
there you go.
That come with it. Thank you. I couldn't get those words.
Yeah, that
out.
urban rule. And I want to put in Whitnall in there. They're also up there.
Correct.
So let's go to some questions now. Should we have about 7 minutes. Let's take a look at that chat, because I think that's our last slide, right? And try to address people's questions.
I did have a thank you, just some reminders to celebrate and come join us at our conference.
October 27th in Brookfield. Hope to see all of you there.
Emily Hanford will be there, as well as a collection of other individuals. And we're still starting to plan for 2024 even. So we've got more coming then. But I think one of the questions was from Janet, and she stated that if schools adopt effective SOAR-based reading instruction in the classroom, students who receive intervention should be able to receive the same instruction, but at an individualized way and pace, correct? Yes, and that's my response. And I'm speaking from the experiences that we have. So our school shifted and have added our special ed students into some of our other intervention courses. We do a pull-out model for middle and high school. So we've now co-partnered and co-taught some of these things. But that's a conversation to have both with the case managers, one would assume, as well as what does that look like for your director of special education, and how does that meet the students' IEP goals if they have that. But somebody else jump in it may
Well,
be.
I
different
was
for
just
different
gonna, I
schools.
think you answered that just fine. I was gonna see if Amy could kind of help Wendy with her question. I'm worried that coaches and upper administration are against the change, so it's gonna affect the teachers. Amy's done a lot of work with leadership and shifts and changes. She could probably shed light on that question.
Yeah, Wendy, I totally can feel your worry. I think you want to try to peel back to the root cause. Like, why are they so against the change? What is it that's holding them back? And we really want to be thinking about the fact that these changes are about bringing equitable practices to more children, right? The way we've been teaching reading in the state of Wisconsin has really served, sort of
40%.
successfully the top end of the kids, right? And we've left sort of to have them figure out on their own the rest of the kids. So moving towards the science of reading, it will allow that classroom teacher in the tier 1 setting to reach more of her students the first time. There will always need to be interventionists, special ed, Title I, all of those folks are still going to have a job. But if we can do tier 1 better and shift our practices, and it doesn't mean throwing everything out. There's things already going well in that language comprehension zone. So you also want to build from what are we hanging on to, right? What is working? What are the practices that we know that work for kids? And then what is this really asking us to attend to? And
I'm wondering too, Amy, if she could even try to say, hey, there's a reading conference, come to the Reading League conference in October. Start to just nudge people together, right? To hear this information in person. I don't know if that's possible or not.
And I know that Emily Hanford's work, depending on where your lens is, we come to everything with confirmation bias. I feel strongly that Sold a Story is a really great podcast, and as well as all of her earlier work that you can listen to. I mean, I just feel like hearing from teachers and students is what needs to happen, right?
I mean, Sold a Story, I had middle school math teachers listening to Sold a Story and watching what their kids were bringing home. And so just send that out, Wendy, just keep nudging people, and you'd be surprised, the people that you can bring along with you. Because like I said, I mean, I'm in a smaller district than you are, but when you have, like I said, your middle school math teacher saying, I see what my kid's coming home and it makes me happy because I know it's aligned.
And the other thing to ask about is how many of I don't know what district you're coming from, but if you have a district where there's more affluence and there's more wealth, and you think, well, we've been doing Lucy for many, many years and our kids are doing great. What you want to peel back is what percentage of your struggling readers have their parents paying for outside tutoring, right? That is huge. And that is how those wealthier districts are claiming success with the 3 queuing, with curricula that's not really aligned, because the parents have their kids' backs and they can afford to. But if you're somewhere else that doesn't have those means, doesn't matter where you live, then we need to be shifting our practices so that more kids get their needs met right away in the classroom day 1. And not,
I mean, Wendy, I'm going back to the reality, we have a law now. It's called Act 20. It's banning 3 queuing. So as much as the coaches and administration are against it, they're going to have to just realize that it's the way we're going to function in our state. And I don't know how that works, Amy. Maybe you can shed light on that.
Well, I mean, it's, I totally understand, and you're just going to have to gently, I mean, I always say that you catch more like flies or bees with honey, right? If you come down on people and you're aggressive, that's really not going to work. You have to ask what are they afraid of, and try to approach it from that angle, and then give the logical, but you got to know your stuff. So like, do the defining guide, do a book study, dig into some learning together so that you understand where this is going. And it's not just coming from a place of fear. The knowledge is what solves that. Got to build the knowledge.
All right, we have just a couple more minutes. Anybody have any questions? Anybody want to unmic and just, we have a lot of experts here. Katie, thank you for being here and putting great ideas in the chat. I appreciate you. Rebecca too, thanks for adding that other one idea. That was a good one. So anybody, one last word, how can we help people? No?
Well, if we can't, we can help you by saying, hey, you've been here. This is great. So if you would like a certificate of attendance, which is always helpful, which is again, another element.
Did we put that in the chat?
I am right now.
Oh, right. Thank you for grabbing that. I forgot about that.
You're welcome. So this shows that you were here and shows that you're putting in your effort to build your knowledge. And June, you're super welcome. I'm a big fan of AIM. So I love that. I will promote away. But there's a lot of great resources. And we really hope that at least tonight you can take away a starting point or a continuation in your learning in order to help us all promote great leadership. Oh,
and I say, like Amy said, just be aware of what's happening in your CISAs, be aware of what's going on with DPI. Hopefully we'll see you at our conference. We have all kinds of virtual events coming up. We're going to try to work and try to support the rollout of the bill so people help to understand. So, just keep your eyes on the Reading League Wisconsin, and we'll try to lend a hand and help you out.
We have some other fun book studies happening with partnerships from Reading League Indiana and our continued friendship with Reading League Michigan too. So don't be afraid to check out those pages as well. I think we're here to help, reach out, help us.
And I think we're going to do a part 2, aren't we?
We did think about that, yes.
Because this is just hitting the surface of what do I do? And we have our Saturday morning teachers lounge, and it's going to be all wrapped around of how to make these shifts. So hopefully we'll see you on some Saturday mornings too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you
can I
all so
ask,
much.
how do you find out about the Saturday morning? Is that on the Reading League website or how?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all of it, everything will be on our website. Follow us on Facebook,
Yeah, I think
on Twitter and Instagram, and our website.
the last page has all of that plus a link of our slides too, because we didn't make these slides available. But this is recording, so you can always return back to it if you need.
Our YouTube channel.
On our YouTube channel.
Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you
All
all so
right,
much.
thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Keep doing the work.
Turn off the recording.
And you can stop share.
Yep.
There. All right, everyone. I'm gonna add, that was great. Anybody have any